Hey everybody. So my name's Justine. I'm the other medical student at Duke who's going to be teaching you guys a semester with Lily. We'll be both back in person next week, so it'll be good to meet you guys. But today we have a pre-recorded lecture for you guys, and we're going to be talking about relationships, sex, consent, and pregnancy. Before we go into that, we just wanted to answer some of the really great questions that we got in the question box last week. So one of those was just about kind of why we're teaching and what makes us qualified to do that. And one of the big reasons that the school and our school think that this was a great idea for us to come in and teach some of these health topics is just because we're a lot closer in age than some of teachers or parents may be to you. So it might be easier to discuss some of these topics and some of the questions you have with us and with people a little closer to age than you. We might know a little bit more about some of the questions that you really have to ask. And then also just as medical students, we receive a lot of teaching on these topics and spend a lot of time talking to the patients that we see about these topics. So we feel that we do have a lot of formal training on how to address questions like these. And then while we realize that we can be a helpful source, we know that we're not the experts, we're not psychiatrists, we're not OBGYNs, but our goal in this is just to give you a broad overview of the content while recognizing that we are limited in what we can inform you guys about.
And then I'll talk about the two other questions that we got last week. The first was asking about female ejaculation. And so first off, this is fluid that is expelled from the urethra that may come from the Skene's glands, but in general, researchers and medical providers don't exactly know where this comes from or how it happens. And the question we received is more about how often does it happen? So while all individuals with female sex organs may experience female ejaculations, studies suggest that only between 10 to 50% actually do. And among those who have had this experience, they only experience it some of the time. So getting at that question, and I put the paper that I found describing kind of this and the most updated research on it at the bottom if you have more questions. And then the second question was about vaginal wetness and why this happens to a female when they're sexually aroused. And this fluid differently comes from the Bartholin glands, which are in the vaginal wall, and from the cervix, and they come from due to the increased blood flow that occurs when someone is sexually aroused. And the purpose of this fluid is to act as a lubricant for sexual activity in order to reduce friction and as well as increase pleasure. So like we said last week, we will spend the beginning of every class answering any questions that you put in the question box. So please put them in so we can talk about them. And then we'll get into today's lecture. The first thing we wanted to talk about, and I'll give you some time to think about, is healthy relationships. And what I want you to do right now, and I'll pause for about 30 seconds to a minute, is to just think or write down or write in your phone some of the attributes of a healthy relationship that you know about. And like I said, I'll give you a couple minutes to do, or a minute to do that right now. Okay, so hopefully you had time to think of some of the things that you think make up a healthy relationship, and we listed some that we think are important to consider. The first is good communication. So meaning, you have open communication and speak clearly with your partner in a relationship. Trust is really important in a healthy relationship. safety and feeling comfortable with that person is also really, really important. Respect for one another, for their opinions, and for what they care most about. And then being supportive of one another, and supportive of what they're doing and who they are as a person. And then we also came up with companionship. So, just caring about the other person. And so those were some of the ones that we came up with, but we recognize, you may have other things that you think are important in healthy relationships. And we just encourage you, as we talk about the other topics today, to keep in mind how complicated and complex relationships can be, and what's important to maintain in them. So now going on to talking a little bit more about what sex is. And we just want to be really clear about some of the things we know about high schoolers and sex and different types of sex. So I wanted to first start by defining sex. It's not just one thing. And there's lots of different types of sexual activities and sex. So what most people think of when they think of sex is vaginal sex, or penis and vagina sex. But that is just, like I said, just one type. So there's also oral sex, which you may have heard about, which means someone's mouth is touching someone else's genital. And there's also anal sex, which is penis and anus sex, and penis and anus sex. So those are all different types of sex. And hopefully when you go to the doctor, they ask you more specifically these types of things, and don't just say sex, because it means a lot of different things. And we're working on that in practice. There's also, like I said, a lot of other sexual activities. You may have heard of things what are colloquially known as fingering or hand jobs, which really just means your hand is on someone's genital. And then there's also dry humping, which is not actually having sex, but having your genital touch each other through clothing. And finally, there's masturbation, which means touching yourself. So sex is more complicated than just maybe what you have in mind when you think about it. And then we wanted to just share some data. This data is from 2017. It was collected, and then it was published in 2018. So it's about 3 years old. And it talks about sex in high school by the numbers, because I think it's important that you guys are aware of what data shows, because like we talked about in the beginning, like we sometimes assume things about each other, and that's not true. So the average age when adolescents first have a sexual intercourse is about 17 years. And among high schoolers, about 41% of males and 38% of females reported having sexual intercourse. And you can see there's a really big difference in age. And it increases over time. So it's about 20% among ninth graders. So I know most of the people in this class are ninth graders, but by the time you're 12th graders, the number goes up to about 58%. And like I said, the reason we're telling you this is just so that you're aware. It's not to tell you if you're behind or if you're ahead, or what your personal opinions or values might be when it comes to sex, more just so that you're aware of what individuals around you and what the numbers say. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is consent. And to start off that conversation, I'm going to play this video for us.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no, thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please. That's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat, going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
So I hope that was kind of a more fun intro than listening to me talk about it, and an analogous way to highlight what's important about consent when it comes to sex, and what it takes to give consent and what's appropriately obtained consent. So this is a really nice graphic that Planned Parenthood uses, and it uses fries to talk about the important parts of consent. So first, it's freely given, which means that someone's giving their consent in a way that they don't feel like they have to. They could say no if they wanted to. So there's no kind of like coercion going on. Second, like the video talked about, just because someone says they want tea doesn't mean it stays that way. So it's reversible, which means anytime someone can say no or ask somebody to stop. The third is it's informed. And I think this is really important, which means that someone's aware of what they're giving consent to. So for example, if someone was giving consent to have sex with someone and they said they were going to use a condom when they had sex, if that person then decides to not use a condom, then they're no longer giving consent for that action, if that makes sense. So it's informed about specifically what they're giving consent to. The fourth is that it's enthusiastic, which means that, like, so again, kind of getting back to the freely given, that someone's honest about how they feel about it. And the last is it's specific, which means it's specific, kind of like informed to the action that they're giving consent to. So it doesn't apply to all of the situation, it applies to the specific situation that person is giving consent to. So I think that's a really good way to think about the parts of consent that are really important. And like the video highlighted, there are individuals who can't give consent in situations where consent is like never possible. So we wanted to go over some of those, and that includes people who are drunk or unconscious. If people are high or under the influence of another drug, that may affect how they're thinking. Like I said, if they're passed out or unconscious, then they can never give consent. And the last is underage. This will vary a lot between states, what's considered the age of consent, and when things like rape may play a role. If there's age differences you may have heard about in the news or generally online. In North Carolina specifically, the age of consent is considered 16. So at the age of 16, you're considered old enough to give consent. And there's a couple other rules related to that, but it's important to know about that given the state you live in, and then be aware of it should you ever move. So, and with that, I'll play this one other video about consent for us.
How do you know for sure if someone wants to have sex with you? Well, actually, there's only one way. They need to tell you. You need to have consent. But what does consent really mean? Consent means both parties are really, truly into what's going on. This means that nobody is being guilted or pressured into doing anything. Silence does not equal consent. Some people think it's not rape unless there's fighting, screaming, or someone yelling no. But that's not true. Communication doesn't always happen with words. Body language can say a lot if you pay attention. Are they leaning in or are they pulling away? Do they look happy or do they look uncomfortable? Are they kissing you back or are they just staying kind of still? You have to pay attention to all the signals. This includes body language and words. No one can read minds, so it's always good to talk about it. Asking for consent doesn't have to be awkward. Asking for consent can actually be kind of sexy.
Want to show me your bedroom?
Show me where you want me to touch you.
Do you want to help me take these clothes off?
So let's break this consent thing way down. 1, everyone's clear about what's about to happen next, and they're happy about it. If you're making out with someone for the first time and you want to go further, check in first.
Gonna take your shirt off.
Want to try something different?
2, everyone in the situation has to feel free to be able to say no without being pressured or hassled. It's not cool to pressure people into doing stuff they're obviously uncomfortable with, or make them feel bad for saying no or wanting to stop things. Being pushy or manipulative makes for some pretty bad sex. And obviously, if a person is drunk, high, passed out, or asleep, it's not okay to do sexual stuff with them. They can't consent when wasted or unconscious. So doing this is actually rape. 3, be honest about whether or not you're on birth control, have an STD, or having sex with other people. Wouldn't you want to know that? If you're going to get naked with someone, you have to have trust and honesty. 4, saying yes to sex once doesn't mean you're saying yes to it forever. It may be tough to pause in the middle of some super sweet action, but your partner has the right to stop at any time. And 5, sex is all about connections and pleasure, right? If everyone feels respected, sex will be much better for both of you. We all deserve a safe, pleasurable, and awesome sex life. The more respect you show to the other person, the more they'll trust you enough to relax and enjoy. And the more honest you are about what you want and don't want, the better things will go. It's easy to talk about what consent means, but what does it look like in real life? How are we supposed to know for sure how far someone wants to go or if they want to get intimate at all? Check out our other videos for tips on how to do this consent thing right.
So those videos are also online should you want to look at them and learn more about consent. And with that, we will talk about pregnancy.
Okay, so I'm gonna go over just some good things to know about pregnancy. So if you're sexually active, the reality is you could get pregnant if you are not using contraception. That being said, a lot of people aren't aware that you should be taking a prenatal vitamin if this is the case, because if there is a chance that you could get pregnant, it's really important to be on a prenatal vitamin. The reason for this is that early on, a baby requires certain vitamins that we don't often get enough in our regular day-to-day diet. So taking a prenatal vitamin can make sure that if you were to get pregnant, that the baby's development would not be impaired. So also, though, taking a prenatal vitamin doesn't mean that you are trying to get pregnant. It just means that if you were to get pregnant, you are ensuring the baby is as healthy as it can be. So there's 3 options if you were to get pregnant. The first one is to carry to term and keep the baby. The second one is to carry to term and give away for adoption. And there's multiple types of adoption, but generally that will be closed or open. And then the third option is abortion. And these are the only 3 choices. So first thing to do if you learn you're pregnant. First thing is you want to talk to a trusted adult, including your parents. If you do not feel comfortable talking to a parent yet, doctors are a really great resource. Planned Parenthood is also a great resource for pregnant teens. So if you're thinking about keeping the baby, what are the next steps with that? It's extremely important to get regular care from a doctor, and that's called prenatal care, to make sure that the baby's development is going well and just to make sure that you and the baby are both being healthy. Pregnant girls require specific vitamins and nutrient intake, regular exams, and they need different medical care than non-pregnant teenage girls. So it's really important to talk to a doctor. If you're thinking about adoption, what are the next steps? So Planned Parenthood, again, and almost all prenatal care clinics will have information on adoption. So they would be great resources. You can also express your interest in adoption to your doctor or healthcare provider, and they can connect you to the best resources. And these resources will be really great to decide if you think adoption is the right decision for you. You don't have to have your mind made up before you ask for these resources, but they can help you make that decision. And you'll still need to have routine prenatal care if you're getting adoption. So it'll be good to talk to a doctor as well for that. And then the third option is if you're thinking about abortion, what are the next steps? So it is 100% necessary to see a doctor to perform an abortion. They are not something that can be done at home. In North Carolina specifically, one of your parents or a grandparent with whom you've lived for at least 6 months has to give you permission for your abortion. A way around this is the judge can excuse you from this requirement. Planned Parenthood in Durham does not perform abortions, but they do give referrals for abortions to a different location. So they could be a resource for that. And then just specifically to give you guys some details about what an abortion would entail. So there's different types of in-clinic abortions that women can receive, and the most common is called an aspiration. It's also known as a vacuum aspiration. It's usually used up to 16 weeks after a woman's last period. And then there's also a D&E, a dilation and evacuation. This is another kind of in-clinic abortion. This procedure is usually performed later than 16 weeks after a woman's last period. So abortions are very dependent on how far along the pregnancy is. It can be very difficult to find a healthcare provider who performs abortions after the first trimester, which is about 3 months. There's a hotline that you can call that is listed on the PowerPoint if you needed to find one of those providers. And you need to keep in mind still, though, that after about 24 weeks of pregnancy, abortions are usually only performed for serious health reasons. And another big factor in abortion is it can cost up to $1,500 in the first trimester, but can often be less, but definitely can be a big expense. Okay, so we're going to take a little time here just to give you guys some time to brainstorm reasons to say no or say yes to sex. So the following questions are: why should teens have sex? Why should teens not have sex? What do teens need in order to be ready for sex? So we're going to give you guys like 5 minutes to do this or so, and we can talk about it next week. So we'll leave this up for a second for you guys to get the questions down. And then we'll give you 5 minutes in a little bit, but we also just wanted to put up the QR code for the question box for next week, just so you guys can make sure you can ask any questions about either the topics we talked about today, like sex, consent, pregnancy, or just about any questions you have related to any of the topics we're going to be talking about this semester or last week's.
And just a reminder to fill out the question box if you have questions or if you don't have questions. So if you don't have a question, you can just say no question today in the question box, but that way we get everyone to fill it out. Cool. So I think with that, that's the end of our lesson for today. We'll have you guys write down or write in your phone the answers to those previous questions because we'll talk about them as a class next week and answer your questions. But thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys.